Ever get that feeling? You know that feeling like your manager's kind of like up to something shady. Turns out there's a whole bunch of research on that, like a whole field. Today we're diving into organizational conspiracy beliefs. It's basically when employees think their bosses are secretly plotting to do something bad.
It's a fascinating area.
Yeah.
We're breaking down a paper from 2025, adds a really interesting layer to this whole thing. It looks at how a leader's own view of their power, how they see it, influences these beliefs, and then how that can lead to employees getting back at them in pretty creative ways.
Ooh, spicy. So the paper, it's called Leaders' Power Control Influences Malevolent Creativity, the mediating role of organizational conspiracy beliefs.
Right.
It's a mouthful.
Itchy title, yeah.
But it is relevant to anyone who's like leading or even being led, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we're going to unpack all the important stuff so you can like spot this happening in real life.
Exactly. The paper really digs into how leaders interpret their power. And there's kind of two main ways they can see it: as responsibility or as opportunity. And this isn't about their intention, like what they're trying to do. It's how their actions are perceived by the people on their team.
Interesting. So give me an example. Like, how would these different leaders act in the real world?
So let's say there's budget cuts happening, right? A leader who sees power as responsibility, they might be super transparent about the whole thing, explaining everything, getting input from the team, trying to make the best of a bad situation.
Right.
But a leader who's more focused on opportunity, they might see those budget cuts as a chance to consolidate their own position, to claim the ladder.
Ruthless.
Even if it means stepping on some toes.
Consequences be damned.
Exactly. And that's where those conspiracy beliefs can start to bubble up, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
The research shows that when employees see their leader acting like that, it's all about me.
It's all about opportunity.
Yeah, they're way more likely to think there's some secret, harmful agenda going on.
Almost like they're waiting for the boss to twirl their mustache and give a villainous monologue.
Right.
Okay, but it goes beyond just like suspicion. This paper also looks at something called malevolent creativity, which I'm assuming is not a good thing.
It's not, no.
So what is that?
Basically, it's how those conspiracy beliefs can actually lead to employees doing harmful stuff, actions that are directed at the organization itself.
So it's not just complaining about the water cooler. We're talking like actual sabotage.
Yeah, it can range from spreading rumors about the company to intentionally making mistakes to slow things down, or maybe even more elaborate schemes. So there's been a lot of focus on the conspiracy theories in general, right? This paper zooms in on how they specifically operate within organizations, impacting leadership and how employees act. It's about understanding that link between what a leader does, how employees perceive it, and then what the consequences of all that are.
Makes sense. It's one thing to think about those big global conspiracies, but it's totally different when it starts affecting your job, your daily life. So how they go about studying this? The paper mentions 3 different studies, right?
3 studies, yeah. The first one was what we call a longitudinal study, which basically means they tracked things over time. They had a bunch of UK employees, and they measured their perceptions of their leaders' power, whether they saw it as responsibility or opportunity, along with their conspiracy beliefs and how much malevolent creativity they were showing. And they did this over several weeks.
So there's like a snapshot over time of how all these things are connected.
Exactly, yeah. Tracking how things change or don't change to see if there's a pattern.
That's really clever. Okay, so study number 1, looking at real employees over time. What about study 2?
So study 2 was an experiment where they basically manipulated how power was portrayed in different scenarios. So they had participants read stories about a supervisor and how he dealt with different situations at work. And some of those stories highlighted the power as responsibility approach, while others focused on power as opportunity.
And then they measured the participants' conspiracy beliefs and malevolent creativity to see if those stories had an effect on their thinking.
Exactly. And they measured malevolent creativity in 2 ways. First, by just asking participants directly, how likely are you to do this or that? And then they used this thing called the malevolent creativity test.
What is this malevolent creativity test?
So basically, participants had to come up with creative ways to get back at their employer.
Okay, so they wanted to compare those self-reported intentions with actual creative problem solving, but for less than ethical purposes.
Precisely. So we've got 2 studies down. Longitudinal study, then an experiment with those manipulated stories. Study 3 was also an experiment, but this time they directly exposed participants to conspiracy theories.
So instead of manipulating the leader's behavior, they manipulated the information the participants were getting.
Right. The idea was to see if just reading conspiratorial content could make people more likely to engage in that malevolent creativity, even if the leader wasn't necessarily acting all shady.
So they were basically testing if those theories themselves could plant the seed for harmful action. That's a little unsettling, but also makes sense, especially these days when everyone's bombarded with information or misinformation all the time.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge issue. Okay, so we've talked about the methods, the how of the research. The big question is, what did they actually find?
Right. Did those hypotheses hold up? Was there a clear link between a leader's perceived power and all those organizational conspiracy beliefs?
Yeah, so the results were pretty consistent across all 3 studies, which is always a good sign.
It's good for the researchers, at least.
Yeah. So they found a very clear link between perceiving a leader's power as opportunity and higher levels of conspiracy beliefs in the employees.
Okay, so the more self-serving a leader, the more their team is going to suspect there's some kind of hidden, not so good agenda.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you start seeing power grabs everywhere and you're like, oh, this is definitely not good. But what about the flip side? Did seeing their leader as someone who views power as responsibility, did that actually make those suspicions go down?
It did, yeah. They found that when leaders were acting transparently, really considering their team's needs, basically demonstrating that responsibility, those conspiracy beliefs went down. It's like building trust actively, kind of like a shield against those suspicious thoughts.
So it's not enough to just be a good leader. You have to really show it in a way that the team actually gets. You know what I mean? That's a pretty big takeaway for anyone who's in a leadership position.
Yeah, it is. And then the findings about the malevolent creativity part, those add a whole other layer, because those conspiracy beliefs didn't just stay in people's heads. They actually predicted an increase in people doing stuff that could harm the organization.
So believing there's this secret plot, even if it isn't real, it can make you more likely to actively act against the company.
Exactly.
That's both fascinating and a little bit scary.
Definitely. And before we get into what those actions were, I think it's important to talk about this concept that the researchers dug into, psychological reactance.
Okay, psychological reactance. What is that? Break it down for me.
So it's basically that knee-jerk reaction we all have when we feel like our freedom is being threatened or someone's trying to control us.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
It's like that urge to press the big red button when someone tells you not to.
Oh, I definitely know that feeling.
Right.
So how does that play out in the workplace with these power dynamics?
Well, when employees feel like their boss is manipulating them or controlling them,
Okay.
especially if the leader's giving off that power as opportunity vibe, it can trigger that reactance. They're pushing back against that feeling that their autonomy is being threatened.
So the researchers are saying that this psychological reactance, this feeling of, hey, don't control me. It helps explain why those conspiracy beliefs can turn into real actions, harmful ones.
Exactly. It's not that the employees are necessarily being mean or vindictive.
Wait.
It's more like they're trying to regain some sense of control in a situation where they feel totally powerless.
Like their inner saboteur gets activated and starts looking for any way to get some of that power back.
Right.
Man, this is starting to feel like a workplace thriller.
Maybe with less dramatic lighting.
Yeah, maybe. But the point is, this stuff's real. And understanding it, how it all works can be really useful, both for leaders and, for people who are being led.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get into some of those examples of malevolent creativity.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. Remember, the researchers weren't just interested in any kind of defiance.
Right.
They were looking for actions that were actually harmful to the organization.
Right. Not just messing around, but really using their smarts to
stick it to the man.
Exactly. Did they give any specific examples?
They did, yeah, and it's a pretty wide range from stuff that's just kind of annoying to full-on schemes.
Okay, so what on the simple end?
So on the simpler end, you've got the classics, right? Spreading rumors about the boss.
Oh, yeah.
Intentionally making mistakes just to slow things down. Calling in sick when you're totally fine.
The classic passive-aggressive trifecta.
Exactly.
Effective, but not very creative.
Yeah, not exactly evil genius level.
Right. What about on the more creative end?
So then you get into some more interesting responses. Some people suggested hacking into the company systems, to leak sensitive information.
Ooh, that's getting a little more serious.
Yeah. Or planting evidence to frame a coworker, or even creating fake social media accounts.
What, like to impersonate the CEO or something?
Exactly, yeah. To make embarrassing statements and make the company look bad.
Okay, yeah, those are definitely next level. It's like the difference between leaving a mean sticky note and like launching a whole smear campaign.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it really shows how creativity can be used for good or for bad, right?
Right.
It's a powerful tool, but it can be a weapon too.
Especially when it's fueled by, resentment or feeling like you need revenge.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to those power dynamics we were talking about before. The study showed that the people who came up with the more creative, malicious ideas, they were more likely to be the ones who saw their leader as, all about opportunity, all about themselves.
Makes sense. It's like they're taking that opportunity and using it against the leader, but in a darker way.
Exactly. When they feel like their boss is abusing their power, they're more likely to use their creativity to strike back.
It's kind of scary to think about, honestly. Makes me look at those office pranks a little differently.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But the point of the research isn't to make us all paranoid, right? It's about understanding how all this works so we can make our workplaces better, healthier.
Right. So for leaders, it's important to really show that power as responsibility. But what about the people who are already stuck in a bad workplace, where they feel powerless and suspicious?
That's a really good question.
What can they do?
That's where things get trickier because the research shows how bad those beliefs can be.
Right.
But it doesn't really have simple solutions.
Like you can't just tell someone, stop being so suspicious.
Exactly. Our beliefs, they're complicated. They're based on our experiences.
It's like telling someone, don't think of a pink elephant. All they're going to think about is a pink elephant.
Right. So instead of trying to make someone change their beliefs, it's more helpful to focus on awareness, helping people understand why they feel that way.
Recognizing that it's probably coming from that sense of powerlessness, that psychological reactance we talked about.
Exactly. And sometimes just realizing that can be really powerful in itself.
Okay, so instead of immediately going into revenge mode, you pause, take a step back.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what evidence do I have to support these beliefs? Is there another way to look at what's happening? What are my goals here? Do I want to cause harm or do I want to find a better work environment?
Right. Good questions.
Yeah.
So you're moving from like reacting to the situation to being more proactive.
Exactly.
Okay, but what can someone do if they're feeling trapped in that cycle of negativity?
Well, it depends, Every situation's different. But maybe they could talk to some trusted coworkers or go to HR. Maybe they could see about moving to a different team.
So it's about finding ways to deal with those feelings of powerlessness, but in a way that's constructive, that doesn't involve hurting anyone.
Exactly. And sometimes, honestly, the best solution might be leaving that job completely.
Yeah, sometimes it's healthier to walk away, find a place that fits you better.
Right. And it's important to remember not everyone who has those beliefs is going to go full supervillain. Right. Lots of people find healthy ways to cope. Maybe they use humor or vent to friends or just focus on their own work.
So you can have those suspicious thoughts without becoming, the office bad guy.
Right. And to be honest, a little skepticism can be a good thing. It keeps you from being naive. Helps you see problems before they get too big.
It's all about balance, right?
Exactly. Being aware, but not letting suspicion take over.
So this research has given us a lot to think about.
Definitely.
But I think it's important to end on a hopeful note.
I like that. What's the silver lining here?
Well, the study focused on the bad stuff, right? But it also shows us what good leadership looks like. It shows that we need leaders who are ethical, who value transparency, and who communicate openly with their team.
So it's not just about avoiding the bad stuff.
It's about actively doing things to build trust, create a better environment.
And for employees, it shows the importance of being self-aware, of thinking critically and taking action, but in a constructive way.
Question your assumptions, get different perspectives, and don't be afraid to speak up, but do it in a healthy way.
Exactly.
Man, this episode has been a real journey. We've explored the dark side of the workplace, those secret plots, all that creative payback.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, there's one last thing I want to bring up, something that's really important. So the study really focused on the relationship between the leader and the employees, right? But what about the organization itself? What role does it play in all this?
Ah, that's a really good point. And it often gets missed because things like the culture of the organization, how they communicate, how transparent they are, those things are shaped by the whole organization, not just one leader.
So even if you have a great boss, someone who really gets that power is responsibility thing, they might still be stuck in a system that's built to create suspicion. We've been talking about all this stuff, power dynamics and suspicion, but it's all been in the context of the US and the UK. But wouldn't those power as opportunity, behaviors, the stuff that makes employees suspicious. Wouldn't that look totally different in other cultures? Like, what if in some cultures, those things we see as red flags, those power grabs, what if that's just normal behavior?
It's totally possible. Or what if employees in different cultures, what if they express that reactance, that pushback against authority in totally different ways?
Ooh, give me an example. What would that look like?
Well, imagine a culture where the ultimate act of rebellion is to follow every single rule perfectly, to the letter, no more, no less. And it just brings the whole system to a grinding halt because it's so inefficient.
Ooh, that's sneaky. I kind of like that. Speaking of sneaky, there's this one part in the paper that really stuck with me. It's about AI.
Yes. They do touch on AI a little bit.
Yeah, and how it plays into all these power dynamics.
It's definitely something to think about, especially with all the,
Yeah, all the AI stuff happened lately.
Exactly. It's kind of a conspiracy theory breeding ground in itself, if you think about it.
Okay, so paint me a picture. Like the AI-powered workplace of the future. What does it look like?
Okay, so imagine a workplace where algorithms are making all the decisions.
Oh, no.
Who gets hired, who gets fired, who gets promoted, even what tasks you're assigned each day.
It's like power is opportunity, but on autopilot.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Algorithms, they're often a black box.
Meaning what?
Even if they're designed to be fair with the best intentions.
Right.
We don't always know how they're making those decisions.
So if you already think your boss is playing favorites, imagine that bias baked into the AI.
And then you try to raise a concern, they're just like, oh, well, the algorithm said so.
Sorry, not my decision.
Talk about feeling powerless.
Oh, yeah. So it's like the perfect recipe for all those conspiracy theories to flourish. Except now, you don't even know who to blame.
You're fighting a shadow.
So is this it? Are we all doomed to become AI-powered pawns in some giant corporate game?
I don't think so. This research shows us that we need more human-centered leadership, not less.
Not replacing humans with robots, but finding ways for them to work together.
We need leaders who can bridge that gap.
Between the tech and the human side of things.
Yeah, who can explain those AI decisions in a way that makes sense, that feels fair. Leaders who create spaces where people feel safe to speak up,
So even with all this tech, all this AI, we still need those core human skills like empathy and
transparency,
fairness. Okay, I'm feeling a little less doomed now. So I think what we've learned today is that whether it's a human boss or some algorithm calling the shots, understanding these power dynamics is key.
Absolutely.
It's about creating a better workplace, a more productive one for everyone.
And it starts with awareness. Pay attention to how power is being used where you work. Don't just accept things blindly. Question your assumptions, and if something feels off, don't be afraid to say something.
Find that balance, right? Being aware and not going full conspiracy theory.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
Well said. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. We've gone from shady bosses to AI overlords and even explored some creative ways to get revenge. But seriously, this research gives us a lot to think about. So to our listeners, we encourage you to go check out the full paper.
Yeah, definitely. And reflect on your own experiences, see how this all might be playing out in your own work life.
Because the more we understand all this, the better we can make our workplaces, right?
Exactly.
Well, that's it for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating look at the world of research.
Until then, stay curious.